Hello, welcome. We're going to talk about student choice and projects, practical, ethical AI integration. You can also scan this QR code right here. If you take out your phone, open your camera, this will lead you to a Google Doc. You'll be forced to make a copy. And the questions on this handout are mostly reflection questions. So as we talk about these concepts, the questions will help you think about your own classroom. To introduce myself, my name is Tara Allen, and I have about 10 years of experience as a high school and middle school social studies teacher. Now I work in instructional design and curriculum development. So today's topic actually includes a lot of different topics. We're going to talk student choice, we're going to talk project-based learning, and we're going to talk incorporating artificial intelligence. But before I get into that, I want to acknowledge that a lot of you might have the experience of at the beginning of the school year, educational leadership comes in or administration comes in with a new system or a new program that they want you to implement. I've had that experience, and I know that it can be really overwhelming to try and change your curriculum when you're getting ready to start a new school year. So that's not what I'm advocating for. This is not the beginning of a school year anyway, but I want you to kind of see some of these things, and I want you to hear some of the arguments for why they're good for your classroom, and then think of how you can implement pieces of this into your current curriculum. So I want to start with a little story about when I taught psychology. So one day I was teaching my students about the science of motivation. And we, as a class, we defined intrinsic motivation and extrinsic motivation. And we talked about how the data is showing that external rewards like money or grades don't motivate creativity. They're great for motivating for other things, but they are not good at motivating for creativity. And if you're interested in hearing more about this, you can look up a TED Talk by Daniel Pink on motivation. It's got some good stuff in it. So because we were talking about this, I decided that I would do an experiment with my students. So the data was showing that humans are most creative when they're intrinsically motivated, when they're given autonomy and choice. So I decided for the last 30 minutes of that class that my students would not get a grade on what they were doing, what they did or didn't do. There was no external reward tied to what they were doing. And I told them I wanted them to create something. I gave them some examples. I said you could build something, you could draw something. And I told them that they could show me what they were creating, but they didn't have to because they weren't getting a grade. And what I expected, based on previous knowledge of students and my experience with students, was that some of my students or most of my students wouldn't do anything. If they're not getting a grade, they're not going to do it. I expected them to put their heads on their desk and fall asleep, and maybe a couple students would actually do something. But I was shocked that every single student in that class found something to create. One student started working on a screenplay, another went to the back of the classroom and started building a sculpture with different textbooks. Students drew pictures, they wrote songs, some of them journaled, and students knew that I was testing this theory of creativity, so that might have biased the results. But I still think that it's true. Humans are intrinsically motivated to create. That being said, with artificial intelligence, it seems like artificial intelligence is attacking our ability to be creative. If we have AI do something for us, then we don't have to do it. And it can be a slippery slope of not being creative or thinking critically about whatever we're doing. But as I discovered many years ago with this experiment, that's not actually what we want. We don't want artificial intelligence to create everything for us, and neither do our students. So this leads me to the topic of giving students a choice, giving them creative projects, and maybe using AI in a way that doesn't sap our creativity or theirs. That might sound like a crazy, impossible task, but I think adding in aspects of these ideas of giving students autonomy and choice can really help motivate students to do it on their own. Think about this question for a second. What learning activity or project do you do in your classroom that both you and your students love? If you want to pause and write down some ideas, you can write down one activity or multiple. We're going to reflect on your idea. Go ahead and do that. So let's reflect on whatever activity you chose. Think about that activity and think about these questions. In that activity, is student choice involved? Do students get to choose their topic? Do they get to express their opinions? Do they get to work with each other in creative ways? I think students are motivated by a challenge and by doing hard things. They want to solve problems and they want to do puzzles. But I think that part of this is they need to feel capable to do those things. They need to feel like they have the tools to help them do the project or activity. This means, as teachers, we need to have clear instructions and examples for them. We need to have scaffolds to help them when they get stuck. So not only do we want to incorporate student choice and creativity, we want to make sure that we have the structure so students feel capable to do that. And I think if they have those systems in place, they will feel capable of doing the assignment and not get overwhelmed and give up or want to have AI do it for them. All right, let's talk a little bit more about artificial intelligence. I know that there are some really strong opinions about artificial intelligence, and I will admit I use artificial intelligence and I use it often. And I'm also aware that I have to be really careful to not let AI do the thinking for me, that I am the critical thinker. If you are familiar with Harry Potter, in the second book, a character named Ginny Weasley starts writing in a diary, and the diary writes back to her and responds to her. And at the end of the book, her father tells her to never trust anything that can think for itself when you can't see where it keeps its brain. I feel like that story is a little bit applicable to this situation. And as teachers, I think that we have the ability to use AI in a way that is helpful. So if students don't use AI currently, they likely will in the future. So our opportunity is to teach them how to use it effectively and in a way that doesn't stunt their critical thinking or their creativity. So we're also going to talk about how teachers can use artificial intelligence effectively and how students can use it effectively. So we'll get into that later. But we need to make sure that we are, as teachers, we're using it in a way that doesn't stunt our own critical thinking or limit our creativity, because AI is not infallible. Here are some ideas of what you can have students consider when they do use artificial intelligence. So this might require having a classroom discussion or setting up some norms with your students on how AI should be used, what it is good for and what it is not good for. If you teach your students that AI can give feedback, it can help them make decisions, it can help them organize their work, it can ask them questions or ask them to consider something else, it can be like a research assistant on a project, I would emphasize to students that AI is not to be used to generate the answer for them. First of all, it makes things up, but more importantly, if AI generates things for you, you are stunting your ability to think critically. And a project you might have students do is you could have them try and get artificial intelligence to generate false information. This might be a fun project for students to do. There's a meme on the internet where a man is asking artificial intelligence how many R's are in the word strawberry, and AI says 2, which is incorrect. And the man says, no, that's wrong. And then AI is like, oh, you're right. I'm so sorry. It's 1. So that is an example of how AI makes things up and doesn't actually think critically. If you have your students try and generate something false with AI, one easy way to do this is they ask AI a question, AI generates a response, and then the student tells them, no, you're wrong. Usually AI, ChatGPT in particular, will agree with you even if they're not wrong. They will usually agree with the person writing the prompt. So that's an easy way to get it to say something wrong. And when you have this discussion with your students, just make sure to teach them that AI does hallucinate. It does come up with false information. It's not a good place to get specific sources. But the most important reason to not rely on AI is humans are the critical thinkers, and they are the ones who should consider what is being generated and if it's useful or not. The title of this presentation is Student Choice and Projects. What do I mean by projects? We're going to talk about project-based learning. If you want to read the definition, I've pasted it up here. You can read that. One of the things I mentioned earlier was there's a pattern sometimes in schools where educational leadership and administration come in with a new program that's going to revolutionize learning, and they ask teachers to implement it at the beginning of the school year. And then teachers get really overwhelmed. The reason I brought this up is this is exactly what happened to me a few years ago when I was teaching full-time. I was recruited to help sell my coworkers on project-based learning and mastery-based grading. And part of the reason they recruited me is because I really believe these are great things for both teachers and students. But the teachers at my school were really overwhelmed at the prospect of making sweeping changes to their entire curriculum, especially at the beginning of the school year, which is very valid. But part of the reason I really like this program is it incorporates a lot of things that are really great for students. I had the opportunity to work for the company PBL and help them design curriculum. They create curriculum for teachers in schools. And some of the aspects of these projects that they are creating are student choice, student autonomy, and they're authentic. So student choice is in every step of the project. Students have a lot of choice in how they're approaching something and what they're doing. Student autonomy, the students meet together every day as a group and they discuss what they've done and what they need to do, what they might need to change as they're working towards solving this problem or challenge. And the third thing is the problems or challenges are authentic. They're applicable to the real world. So students are motivated to come up with answers because they see how applicable the problem is to the real world. And as we've talked about, giving students autonomy and ownership and choice in what they're doing will help them be intrinsically motivated to learn. So these are the aspects of project-based learning that I love and that you can maybe implement in your classroom. Let's look at examples of what this looks like in different subject areas. Here are a couple of examples of projects you can use in different subject areas. And because I'm a social studies teacher, I don't teach science or English. I used AI to help me come up with project ideas, and you can too. I created a handout that you can use that walks through this process. I'll give that one to you at the end of the presentation. So what I did is I took the standards for the state of Utah for both science and English, and I asked ChatGPT to help me come up with project ideas. So when you're writing a prompt for ChatGPT, it's important that you tell it what its role is. You say, you're a curriculum expert, you know how to help teachers create lessons that meet a variety of student needs and follow standards. And then I told it to use these state standards, paste state standards, help me come up with a list of potential projects that I could have students do throughout the year to help them explore topics covered in the standards. I added it needs to have student choice, student autonomy, and it needs to be authentic or real world. I told ChatGPT to give me a bunch of different options, and a lot of the options weren't good, and these are some that I thought were okay. And if you're a science teacher or an English teacher, you can evaluate these as you feel necessary. So there's a question and then there's a project. So the students are attempting to answer the question with the project. And here are more examples of project ideas that you could do in your classrooms for a variety of subjects. Now let's talk about how we can evaluate the quality of these projects. So after you've generated a list of projects, you need to evaluate if these projects are good and if they'll work for your classroom. So think about what the students will be doing for the project you're designing. Is there a lot of listening? Is there a lot of reading? How much collaboration is there? How much discussion is there? How complicated is it? Will it take multiple steps, multiple days? Will students who are absent be able to do the project on their own? So these are some questions to help you evaluate the project and if it's a good fit for your classroom. And I will include some questions to ask yourself when it comes to evaluating different projects in the handout at the end. So I'm showing you right now how you can use artificial intelligence to help you come up with project ideas. I want to stop for a minute and emphasize that having artificial intelligence help you brainstorm ideas for what to do in the classroom is an ethical use of AI. And I'm not here to be the person to tell you what's right and what's wrong when it comes to using AI in your classroom, but I will say that if you expect your students to not turn in things that are generated by AI, you should not be someone who is using AI to generate all the content for your lessons. So that being said, let's talk about what you're asking your students to do in your projects and how deep the questions are. I'm sure you've heard of Bloom's taxonomy. Basically, it's a pyramid showing you different levels of thinking. So at the bottom, it's recall and remembering, recalling the facts that you've taught them. Then we move up to understanding, then applying, then analyzing, evaluating, creating. When it comes to a project for your classroom, you want to look at the top level of the pyramid. You want your students to be thinking deeply. You want to think about if the project involves students having prior knowledge about something. You want to think about if they are designing, assembling, constructing, if they're appraising, arguing, defending, or judging, because these projects require a deeper level of thinking. So these would be good verbs to use in your questions for your projects. Let's continue talking about aspects your project should have to be good for your students. So we talked earlier about a project that you do in your classroom that students really love, that you and your students really love. You might have also had the experience of you're really excited to teach a new activity or a new lesson and it flops. One example of this for me is I was really excited to teach my students each lyric of We Didn't Start the Fire by Billy Joel. I would go through and I was going to talk about each person and each event and talk about how it relates to pop culture and how it was important to U.S. history. And while they were interested for the first 20 minutes, they were not interested after that. And I had probably prepared enough material to talk about it for 3 hours. And this wasn't a project, and that's kind of the point, is my plan was I was so excited about the content, but I didn't actually consider what the students would be doing, listening the whole time. And no wonder they got bored. So as you are deciding what project to have your students do in your classroom, consider what they're doing and if it's passive or active. I know as a history teacher, a lot of us have a hard time not lecturing because we feel like we have all the answers and they need to know what we know. But I'm sure you know students are much more likely to learn if they're doing something hands-on and if they're excited and interested in what they're doing. So we've already talked about making sure that the students are doing some deep thinking in your project. You also need to make sure that you have very clear instructions for your project. You need to also have examples for your project at each step. And you need to have any resources that they need to help them answer the question and complete the project. And I'm not going to sugarcoat it. For it to be a good project, this can take some time. It can take a lot of prep to make sure you have really good instructions, really good examples, and really good resources. But if you have a really good project, the students will be excited and they will do some real critical thinking for your project. As we wrap up, let's talk about how you as the teacher can use artificial intelligence to help you with the creation of some of these projects. And as we do that, I want to reiterate some of the things we talked about earlier, where as the human, you are the critical thinker and AI is not. And how if you expect your students to turn in material that is not generated by artificial intelligence, you can perhaps hold yourself to the same standard, that you should not give your students examples and instructions and resources generated by artificial intelligence without you reviewing and assessing the quality and editing those resources as necessary. And while I don't pretend to be the ethical expert on artificial intelligence, I do think that there is a way to use it that can help make this process much easier for you as long as you are using it in a way that makes sure you are the critical thinker who makes the final decisions. That being said, here's a list of things you can do to help you come up with ideas and refine projects for your classroom. When it comes to your students using artificial intelligence in the classroom and in these projects, we've talked about how you can have a discussion with your students. You can set up norms when it comes to using AI. You can teach them that artificial intelligence can be used to help them organize, come up with questions. It can be their research assistant. So all those things are also important, and I can suggest that maybe you use some of these questions to have your students do a self-check when it comes to their use of artificial intelligence, to have them think about what they're using it for and if it's helpful, and keeping them at the forefront of you are the one in charge of the work submitted and you are the critical thinker in this process. So these are some questions that you might consider having your students answer. That concludes our presentation. Thank you so much for being here today. Here are some ways to get in contact with me. I told you I would let you download a handout that kind of walks you through the process of creating these projects for your students using AI prompts so that is right here. This QR code will take you to my website. My website is also listed over here. Also, you can follow me on Teachers Pay Teachers. I have a lot of resources, particularly psychology resources. And thank you so much for being here.